Alright, so my Tabor City home here. I had originally filmed an introduction into this video that my son was in, and he was terribly embarrassed. And as a father, it's not my role to embarrass my children, so I'm not going to use it. And but I'll give you the background on it. My son called me and let me know that he had a light on his dashboard of his PT Cruiser that looked like a battery. It was lit up red, and asked me what to do about it. And I told him, you know, that bring the car on home once you made it home fine. I told him the next morning, I want you to take it down to auto parts store and have him check the battery in the alternator. He took it down there, had him check the battery, which was fine. He did not have him check the alternator, so he sets off on his way to go to work and ends up broke down on the side of the road. So long story short, ended up having to change the alternator on his PT Cruiser. Never did an alternator on a PT Cruiser before. Pretty much all that was new to me. You're going to see in this video, by the time we start the video up, we pretty much got into the alternator, disconnected the alternator from the motor, and taken the alternator out of the engine compartment, putting the new one back in, and all the stuff associated with that. And one of the reasons I did that is, number one, I was just trying to get the work done. I didn't really think about filming a YouTube video with it. And there's another gentleman on YouTube. I found one other video about changing an alternator in a PT Cruiser, and pretty much everything he said was applicable right up until the point in time of how to get the alternator out of the engine compartment. And in his video, he talks about undoing the motor mounts, which we had previously done when we had to do the timing belt and water pump on his car, and then jacking the motor all the way up, and the alternator would just pop out of the bottom, and it didn't work for us. We moved that motor around 10 ways from Sunday, and nothing that we tried would get that motor or get that alternator out of the engine compartment. So ultimately, what we ended up doing was having to take the CV axle out of the passenger side of the car in order to get the alternator out of the engine compartment. And so this video picks up from that point. Pretty much, if you want to know how to get the alternator out, you can just follow the instructions in this video in reverse. I want to remind everybody, I'm not some ASE certified nothing. I'm just a fixer. I'm a guy who tinkers on cars and tries to put them back together and things like that. So, you know, I'll do all this at your own risk. But this worked for us. I probably spent about as much time trying to mess around raising and lowering the motor to get the alternator out of the engine compartment as what it took me to remove the CV axle, pull the alternator out, put the new alternator in, put the CV axle in, and then button everything up. So if you have a moderate amount of mechanical skills and knowledge and abilities and have done some, you know, fairly significant work on vehicles before, this should not be too over your head. You should be able to do this. By far, the car I hate to work on the most. To this point, I'm going to be honest with you, I do not like working on PT Cruisers. It's just, everything's so crammed in there that I'm still healing up from all the cuts and scrapes on my hands and everything else from trying to do that job. So anyways, it will pick up in the video. You can just watch it, follow it in reverse for how to get everything out, and I hope this helps somebody. So, from my Tabor City home to you, there we go. Okay, so now we're at the point where, in order to make the room in this area to get the alternator out here, we have to take this CV joint out. So, one of the things that you have to do is you have to get this axle pushed out of the hub right here, and it's in there quite tight. And since we're going to reuse the CV axle, we don't want to damage the threads on the end of this axle here. So what we do is we back our nut out. If you can see, there's a little bit of room. The axle's actually in deeper than the outside of the nut. Once we get that, take a hammer, and as you can tell, it's free. And that is how you back a axle out of a hub without damaging the threads on the axle. So, get to you with the next part. Alright, so again, you know, if we're going to save this axle, if you're going to put a new axle in here, you know, you just take all this out, be good with what you're doing. We're actually going to reuse this axle. The axle is not the problem. So we're going to save all these pieces here. I'm just getting this out of the way. Alright, so where I eventually found the leverage to pry this particular piece out was taking an angle bar and down here, this little piece here under the motor, put the tip, put the curve in there, and then fit the end up against there and gave it a couple real quick shots like that and managed to work that piece loose. As you can see, now we got transmission fluid leaking everywhere, but is what it is. I forgot to put a pan under there. Hold on a second. All right. Let's see what we got here now. So there you go. Alternator's out. this is not the easiest car to work on. It really isn't. This is the deal. Pieces like alternators, a lot of times brake calipers, starters, things like this, they're going to have what you call a core charge. I'm going to shut old Johnny Cash off here for a minute. They're going to have what you call a core charge. The alternator that my son's going to buy to put back on his car is remanufactured. Just means it's been rebuilt. Doesn't mean it's not as good as new. They take these, they completely clean them up. In most cases, in almost all cases, they put all new parts inside. The remanufactured part is basically, you know, the external housing, which gets cleaned. But you want to take this with you when you go to the parts store. 2 reasons. Number one, set it on the counter, compare it to the new part, make sure that your plug-in are all the same on the new one as they are on the one you took out. And the second thing is, when you buy something like this, you're going to have a core charge. When I was looking online at different parts stores, the core charge for this at one parts store was $50. So the price quoted on the internet, I think, was roughly about $150 for the $50 core charge. If you don't bring this with you to the parts store, they're going to charge $200. You're paying $150 and a $50 core charge. If you take it with you to the parts store, not only do you get to compare it and verify that you have the right part, but you don't have to pay the core charge. You just give this to them and leave with the new part. So you're saving yourself an out-of-pocket expense of $50. Now, if you don't have this, and you go to the parts store, you buy the new one, you're absolutely certain it's going to match up. When you get the old one out, save your receipt. When you get the old one out, take it back to the parts store, give it back to them, they give you your money back. They give you that core charge back, all right? So just always verify, and it's always better to take this part with you to the parts store when you go, all right? Okay, so here we are back with the new part. Verified. We actually got this Advance Auto. We took the old one with us again. You know, talking about core charges. $54 is what we save by having the old one there and just giving it to them for the core charge. And they were able to put the old one on the computer that they had and verify that it was not charging. And then we just asked them, just check. They put the new one on there and verified that it was charging. So, feel pretty good about this. We're going to snake this thing back into this hole here. Excuse me. Again, you know, kind of remembering how the old one came out of this thing. We're going to slide this new one up here. Now, on getting this alternator swapped out, we're going to just do all the alternator stuff, and then once we get the alternator stuff finished, we'll go ahead and work on the CV joint. So, and maybe having the CV joint out of the way while we get this alternator stuff done will make a little bit more room in here. I tell you, never in my life have I worked on a car or a backhoe or anything else that was as much of a pain in the butt getting this stuff done as getting an alternator out of a PT Cruiser. It's crazy. I don't know what Dodge Chrysler was thinking, but whoever the engineer on this one was, I am sure that they have been cussed up one side and down the other for years and years and years. Probably one of the most hated engineers in all automotive history. There we go. She's in there. Again, you know, we're not trying to force it in there too hard. We're just trying to get it in there. So, let me get a couple other things adjusted. And, well, actually, I did want to show you guys something. So, top of the alternator has one bolt in there. And there's actually a tensioner bolt, and the bottom of the alternator for PT Cruiser has 2 bolt holes through it, and the top has 1. And this particular bolt actually comes through the brace in the alternator, and then there's a bolt hole in a slide bracket down there that it goes through. You put the nut on here. This is the tensioner bolt, and the tensioner bolt actually threads through the back end of this bolt. And as you screw this bolt in or out is when it slides this bolt, down the sliding bracket. So you need to make sure that as you replace the bolts in this alternator, that the single hole in the alternator is up, because the double holes go down to the bracket that bolts on the back of the motor, and that you, before you tighten that top bolt down on the alternator, you want to make sure that you get this tensioner bolt in there and get it seated and get it threaded in, so that you can do the tightening on the alternator and get some tension on that belt. Alright, so be back with you in a minute. We're going to get a couple things set up in here, and then we'll show you the rest of this. Okay, so here we are. We got the alternator in here. Gone ahead and hooked this up. You want these covers. Do not discard these covers. You want to get them, you want them back in the right place, properly on the vehicle. You know, I know mechanics who say they're not important, you don't need them. I think that's a bunch of hooey. Again, same theory as when I was working on the backhoe. You know, every one of these pieces they put in these vehicles has a purpose. No question about it. So, got this threaded on here. It's easier to get that particular line on first, because the other line that's up here that connects into this connection is shorter. So this gives you the most length. You can leave the alternator rest on the frame. You can get this tightened up. That's a 13 millimeter bolt, or yeah, excuse me, 13 millimeter nut. Then we're going to lift this piece and we're going to hook it into the wire that goes into the back here. After we get that done, we'll work on getting the brace in place, and then we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna get the alternator installed before we reinstall the CV joint. So, okay, so this is the brace that the alternator from the bottom is installed on. Notice that these 2 bolts are different, and the reason for that is that this bolt just bolts directly into the back side of the block. So does this, but this one, as you can tell, has some threading on the end of it. And this threading is, once you install these bolts, the heat shield actually gets put over this, and then a nut gets placed over top of that to hold the heat shield in place. These 2 up in here, in this area, the actual bolt holes are here, right here, and right here. This is the one with threaded for the heat shield. I actually pushed the heat shield up out of the way over here.
But this one is where the heat shield bolts onto, and this was the one where the heat shield does not bolt onto. Okay? Alright. So, this bolt nut combination here is what holds the bottom of the alternator in the brace. So, we get that bottom up here. There we go. And this tab is bent this way because once you start threading the alternator, you won't get back here with a screw to it, so it won't, or a wrench, so it won't just continually move around on you. I don't know, boys, this one's making me feel a little old today. So, we are going to go back to our handy dandy 15mm socket. Now, we're not tightening this all the way down, because we still have to put the top bolt in and make sure that we get that thing squared up. And I showed you guys how that fits in with that tensioner bolt, so we need to make sure we get all that right before we get this thing tightened all the way down. Alright. Alright. Here's our bolt for the top. So, alright, so I got this piece on here, and then we got our bolt is located up here. We got that on there. We fished the tensioner bolt in from the hole that's on the back of that slide bracket, and through the grace of God, that thing lined right up. We managed to get it threaded in there. So now we just pull the alternator back. Sitting here laying on a wrench. It's always fun. That's belt on. Okay, so once you have the belt on, make sure all the grooves are lined up. And then the next step is to go, we're going to go from the top. And basically what I found yesterday was a very small ratchet with, I think it's 13. Yep, 13mm. And you're going to reach down right behind under the condenser for the air conditioner, and you'll access that tensioner bolt. And you're going to tighten that tensioner bolt up. And then once you have a decent amount of tension on that belt to where you're sure that it's good and tight, you're going to lock down those other two bolts. We're going to tighten this up. And that's what we're doing now. All right. Okay, so we got the tensioner bolt tightened up. We got good tension on the belt, but not too much. Okay, you're not trying to break the thing getting it on here. So we just want good solid tension, and that's what we've achieved here. So let's see. Now we're not gonna be able to get up there with the shallow socket, so we're gonna need. As you can tell from the sound of wrenches, I don't exactly have my wrenches all in order at the moment. I have them pretty scattered out on the pavement here, which is never the way I like to do business, but I'll be honest with you. At this point in time, with this car, I just want to be done. I'd rather have to work on the backhoe than have to work on this car, to be honest. This is ridiculous. Again, I mean, I don't know who the engineering team was from Chrysler who worked out this design, but at the end, if they sat around getting themselves a bunch of high fives, it was only because they hated mechanics, or that Chrysler was really looking to boost up the manpower hours on repairs for their apparatus here, because let me tell you, the charge quoted for an alternator replacement for this car was ridiculous. I called the local shop because, as I said, this particular car broke while I was at work, and I was kind of hoping that somebody here locally to have a little bit of free time, you just run out and grab it, slap an alternator on it. And again, I'm no spring chicken here, but I'm gonna tell you what, the quoted repair costs on an alternator for this car was as much as is what I remember a Chevy 305 engine rebuild being when I was in high school. So, and again, you know, I understand the economy's changed and money's different now, but come on, people. Really? Rebuild a 305? So, I don't know. God bless a Dodge mechanic is all I can say, because they hate you. Whew. Okay, so we got in here, we did the tensioner, we got the belt tight, we went up here and tightened up the screw or the nut on the top, 15 millimeter. We ended up using an open face wrench. Tighten down this 15 millimeter, just use the regular socket. Now, if you look back in this hole, right there, you'll see the opening for the, excuse me, right there, you'll see the opening for the CV joint. So we're going to put the CV joint back in it. Now, I do want to make a note that doing this job, we took the motor mounts out. Now, took this motor mount out, which is this right here. Took this out, which is right here, which 55 torque, and then 46 years old. Took these two out, which is right here, which were 15mm bolts. Okay, why? Manipulating the motor up and down makes more space, gives you more room to work. As you can see, we have the jack with a block of wood up under here, and lowering the motor definitely gave us more space than what we had we not done that. So we're gonna get this axle back in here. All right. So putting an axle back in a car. All right. Lots of fun. So here's the deal when dealing with axles. The end that goes in transmission has splines on it, just like this end does. And what you have to do, rotate the axle a little bit until you get those splines to line up. And then, almost like you're taking a spear and you're trying to jab something, you want to snap it in there real quick. There's a snap ring that has to engage on the axle that keeps it in place. So that's what we're going to give an attempt to do here with it. Okay, so if you're watching this video, it's simply a CV axle video. We pushed the CV axle in. It felt like a positive in, but when I did a Chrysler Town and Country, there was somewhat of a click kind of a feel when you got it all the way in there. Those CV axles, at the end of the axle that engages the transmission, had like a metal snap ring on. So I wasn't getting that click feeling out of this. Pulled the axle back out, looked at it, there was no snap ring on it. So got it in there, pushed it in, moved it around. Thing slid in, felt like it was positively engaged, gave it just a tight slight little bit of a tug back, no give as far as the come back out part of it. If you pull a little bit too hard, it would come back out, but you know, I had to pull it about as hard as what I pulled it to get out of there. So realigned it again, shoved it in there good and hard. Again, feel like it went in there positively, and pretty much engaged. So there is this rubber-ish type sliding thing that does not move on the axle. It's locked in place, and when I got it into the axle, that was it perfectly lined up with the plate that it bolts into. So pretty much felt like it was positively engaged in there. So what I turned around and did was I put a quart of transmission fluid into it. There's no transmission fluid leaking out of the bottom where the axle comes into transmission. So what we're going to do is finish putting this together, and yeah, hopefully that'll be it. Come here. Okay, so made a little bit of an error here. One of the things I did was try to put this thing back together, and I forgot, as I was putting the hub back together, to get this piece back on the axle. So what do fixers do when they do that? Take it back apart, get it back together right, and then we rock on. So I am not in any way, shape, or form, not pretending to be, not acting like I am, don't have a certificate on the wall, an ASE mechanic, or any other professional type of mechanic. I am a fixer. I fix things, I figure out how they're broke, how they work, and how you fix them. I don't pretend to be a professional mechanic, have a lot of respect for the guys who go to school and actually learn all the technical stuff with this, but that ain't me. And I'm just a guy who feels like, you know, I mean, I can fix stuff. So, been doing this since I was young. Not to say that I think I'm old, but I've been doing this since I was young. So, we're gonna get the nut on here. Alright, that's good there. Now, as for the two, and there are two of them, where'd the other one go? Ah, there we go. As for the two bolts that go in here, there and there, well, let me see if I can find my camera adequately. The way I get this lined up is I get a pry bar under, and I put it on top of the caliper and pry it down and try to manipulate it around until I get that first bolt in where it needs to go. Now, notice I'm not sitting here beating on this thing with a hammer trying to get this bolt in here. And the reason for that is because if you put the bolt in, you start beating on it with a hammer to get it the rest of the way in there, the only thing you're going to achieve is you're going to beat the threads off the front of the bolt. And then you got yourself a whole world of problems. There are times when you're working on stuff, it can be rough. And there are times where sometimes being a little bit more gentle is going to get you a lot better success. And this is one of them patience times. So as you saw, we managed to get those bolts in there without beating on them with a hammer. And again, the threads are intact. The threads look good. You know, again, there's a time and a place, but this ain't the time and this ain't the place to do it. So do. All right. La-di-da-di. Got a one. Smart one. What you got over here? Let's see. Alright. So alright. So those bolts, 21 millimeter. This is 1.25 inch socket. According to what I found on the internet, and everybody knows the internet never lies, this is 180 foot-pound torque. So I'm gonna go get my torque wrench. Be back in a minute. Torque wrench. Where we're at. Okay. So, holding my hand, the holy hand grenade. No, if you guys are Monty Python fans, you would have got that reference. 2 torque wrenches. Okay. Both of them are foot-pound torque wrenches. This was the first one I ever got. I got this one, a little bit bigger drive, a little bit beefier. This particular foot-pound torque wrench goes up to 80 foot-pounds. This particular torque wrench goes up to 150 foot-pounds. I just told you that we got to have 180 foot-pounds on that nut. So we're going to go to 150 and then kick it to 11. It'll work, I promise. Anyways. Again, I'm not a certified ASE mechanic, and if you try this at home and you wreck your car, that is your fault. But the way a torque wrench works is, if you look here, you can see one side shows you kilograms, the other side shows you pounds. Okay, and then down here on the handle there are numbers. There's a little nut here on the bottom that will loosen the bottom handle up so you can turn it. So if you come down here and you notice there's a 0 right here, and at that 0 we're showing that we are at 10 pounds. So right now this torque wrench would be set at 0 for 10 pounds. If our torque was 12 pounds, we would dial this up to where the 2 was at the 10. It would be just slightly above the 10, and we would be at 12 foot-pounds. If you notice, as we continue to turn, when we get back down around the 0, now we're at 20. So you basically dial the torque wrench to whatever torque you're looking for, and in our case, we're, like I said, kicking this sucker up to 11. Gets tighter, the handle gets tighter as you go. So right here, we would be sitting at 150 torque. We're at the 150 bar with a 0. That's 150. So this particular torque wrench does a little bit more. So I'm going to say that's 160. That's 170. Well, it looks like about 172 is about as high as it's going to let me get to. So 172. Yay, 172. So Again, boys and girls, this is a fixer channel, not a ASC mechanic channel. So we're going to tighten these bolts. Good and tight. So we don't want them moving around either. So, come on, you bloody thing. Let's see. 1 10 8 1/4. Alright, so this is a 3/4 inch drive. I get these 3/4 inch sockets from one of our local places. I live in an area where they do a lot of agricultural stuff, so there's a lot of big drives around here. So all I did was I got a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch adapter. Goes in a 3/4 inch drive for 1 1/4 socket. 1 1/4. So it goes on in here. See? You hear how that thing clicks? So when you put on it, that click right there tells you that you have reached your torque. Alright? There are other kinds that have a little dial knobby. Well, I'm sure you can find a video on that. This is a click type torque wrench. So I can't say we're at 185, but I can tell you that I believe we're somewhere around 172. At 172, we click. You're going to go slightly past that. Take this sucker off right here. Now, we have a retaining little nut thing here. Looks like a wavy washer. It's not bent. It's actually what it should be. Okay. So that goes on there. We're going to turn it so we can get the cotter pin in. Then we have this little lock here. The lock goes over here. The purpose of the spring is to continue to push this out to keep this tight against the cotter pin. Okay? So this spring is important. Don't think it's not important. It's important. It's important. So sometimes you get them where they don't line up, and you have to do some, excuse me, you have to do some adjusting. Put the washer back on. Put the nut back on. Okay. So that's what you look for. See how this thing is springy? You push it in, it's going to spring back out. But see how it's lined up with the hole here that the cotter pin's going to go in? Well, we have that thing lined up. Yes, I'm reusing the cotter pin. And I know by some of the purest definition I would be like violating the holy sacrament of cotter pins. Again, guys, I'm a fixer. I'm not a mechanic. I'm a fixer. So we have that thing in there. And now we're going to grab our vice grip. Give this thing a good turn so we get it oriented the right way. I think the majority actually fix-it videos on YouTube are from people who aren't mechanics, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I've seen some on there who are mechanics, and they're jam up. Eric the Car Guy is one that I watch occasionally. I think he is entertaining and informative, and I give him 2 thumbs up. So So, axle's back on. No leaky. Back through here. Torqued, threaded, spline, locked down. We're going to call that a done axle. Yo, done.
So there you go. That was the job in its entirety. As far as the alternator goes, everything worked well once we got it all put back together. I will note that you need to have the auto parts store when you take your old alternator with you, have them test it if they have the ability, verify that the alternator's bad, have them check the new one, verify that it's good before you take it home and do go through the work of putting it on there. Regulating of current, from my understanding, in these Dodges and Chryslers is done from the computer. So there is a possibility you could go through the trouble of swapping out an alternator and that's not your problem. So it's best just take them with you. We took the old one with us. It failed at the store. So we were pretty sure that we were on the right track of swapping out an alternator. Beyond that, hey, let's do something. Let's fix something. Let's build something. Let's do something with our hands. America's not a disposable nation. God bless from my Tabor City home to you.